Cool. So I had the first agenda point. I'll share my screen, kind of talk through it. So recently, a feature flag was turned off for the security and compliance configuration page. And there are two tabs in it right now. The first one focuses on security testing. So it tells you whether your SAST and DAST and container scanning is all set up. And then gives you links to either docs or ways to directly kick those things off, like in the UI. So I think there was a lot of thought to the security page. The compliance one, I think, just got shipped very MVC. So you might notice that the actual description here didn't change at all. It's the same one, but it's talking about security stuff. So that's got to be updated. If you didn't know this already, my group does not actually own license compliance. It's actually a different group. So there's some overlap in terms of how users might perceive compliance and how we break apart the features across our stages and groups. So I was trying to think about how we could address what I consider UX debt at this point, because now we have something called compliance configuration, and it's lacking a lot of our feature set. So if you're actually in our docs, you would see that we have a compliance feature page, and it has a bunch of features listed, the tier they associate to, and whether or not it's something that's on self-managed or SaaS. So initially was thinking, okay, it looks like the intent of the security settings is to help you better understand what features tie specifically to the security of your project, and then whether or not you're taking advantage of those features. So in that same vein, I was thinking of doing this something similar for the compliance side, where calling out the different compliance features that we have documented, but perhaps like showing some details that aren't necessarily exposed because they're buried in settings and you have to be like an owner to see them. So being able to know like what restrictions do you maybe have around your SSH keys, or knowing that your protected branches are configured. Like we don't necessarily know what the configuration is as developers of GitLab.com or GitLab itself, but it might be nice to know all the different compliance features and whether or not they're being utilized. So I guess where I was trying to get some feedback from you all is what are your thoughts around this type of page and communicating both the utilization of a feature, but also perhaps like giving them a direction to kick off the configuration if they haven't done so already?
Have you spoken with Growth about wizards or onboarding or anything like that? Because I feel that might tie into this. How do you encourage or get them to cohere and activate or change these things?
It's a good question. The most frequent conversations I've had around with Growth have been some of the conversion states, is what I've been calling them. Like, hey, you're not on Ultimate, try this feature and get to experience it for the first time. But I haven't talked to them directly about this page. Honestly, I just kind of remembered it for the first time on Friday. Andy was the one working on the security, like the designs for all of this back, I want to say in like the spring. And when he was gone on paternity leave, they built it and then they just recently removed the feature flag. So I think maybe where a good place to start would be just continuing to ask Andy some more questions, and maybe he's worked with the growth team already to develop like why this page should exist, because it is kind of unique. Like we don't really have any other configuration sections under any of our other settings, or sorry, any of our other feature sets. It's only in security and compliance. So perhaps I could get some more context from them.
Yeah, when I'm looking at it too right now, Austin, I'm curious. Do you know what compliance is planning, or what their plan is to what they want to do in their tab?
Which piece, license compliance or the other compliance features?
I guess like just for that new tab, is there do you have any insight into like what their roadmap is or anything like that? What's how this page is going to change in the future?
Yeah, I don't think anybody is really taking direct ownership of it. I think what Andy's initial approach was all right, these are all the features that we have in the security and compliance tab. So therefore we need to have probably something associated to each of these in the configuration page itself. So that was the starting point. I don't think anybody specifically owns the compliance tab. I just am volunteering myself to take ownership of it, if that
Gotcha.
makes sense. I think
Yes.
the main focus for Andy has been the secure side, and it was like, oh, there's license compliance. Where do I put this? It's not a security feature, so I guess it goes under compliance because it's got the word compliance in it.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, so I'm trying to find a good MVC forward. One way I thought I could do this is, we start with what exists today. So it's just the license compliance, and maybe we add on just one of the compliance features. So maybe we add on separation of duties, and we tell you whether or not you've set up protected branches. Mix everything else, just like add one little piece in and start creating like a compliance roadmap for projects to both have like a point to redirect them to all the different compliance settings, or a way to understand like what's their posture today.
Got it. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I do like your idea there of exposing some of the features there. Like for example, under the SSH key restrictions, where you could see some of the read-only information. Yeah, but like you said too, like I haven't seen this pattern anywhere else, in the application. So yeah, I would probably double check also with foundations, maybe see if they have any thoughts or maybe they see any overlap.
Yeah, I know Michael Lay has been keeping a loose tab on this because he's referred to the security designs that Andy put together in a couple places. So I think he's also maybe a good resource that I could touch on, since he's pretty much taking the settings experience into consideration too. I think the complexity for both security and compliance themselves is a lot of our features are disjointed. So the settings are buried in different places, and bringing them together into a cohesive space that gives you both an awareness of how are you utilizing these expensive features, for lack of a better description, and how can you actually take advantage of them, would help streamline that experience a bit more, so you don't have to have so much discovery, which goes back maybe to Daniel's point of growth might have some ideas.
I was gonna say, just in regards to the way the visual layout is set up right now, it's, as Libor had mentioned, that it's kind of a new appearance, but I quite like it, and I want to see if we can take that into admin settings or settings in general. So part of the work that we're talking about, at least in Access, and part of the work with the setting stuff, is cleaning up a lot of that and how it's presented, because there's a lot of inconsistencies with that. I do like this presentation, but one of my feedback concerns was this empty left-hand column, just tons of white space. Doesn't pertain to your topic in general, but something in regards to your layout. Visually, I think it's fine. It makes sense. I think your MVC proposal also makes sense, but that's my only concern, is the visual presentation at this point.
Yeah, I agree. I brought that up initially, even with Michael, when he was designing the settings sections, because like we would have this description of the content on the right on the left-hand side, but as you can even see in here, like it doesn't scroll with the content. So like it's just kind of killing space. I think at very least it needs to be pinned so that it scrolls with the content, so when you're at the bottom of the page, you at least still have context that you're working with the security and testing. But yeah, it did kind of just like form on its own. I don't really know how Andy got to this point necessarily. So I guess if you're a smaller design, that content just goes to the top of the page. But again, yeah, I agree with you 100%, like the white space. It does kind of fit the side-by-side view that Michael was going for, but then it also brings in these like gray containers to like break it down to chunks, which is not necessarily what was in that design that Michael was working on. So I think there's still some design iteration that might happen in this space. But nonetheless, enough about me. I think that was great. I have some good ideas about people I could talk to next, and it was nice just kind of bouncing some ideas off of you both. Daniel.
Yeah, cool. It's an interesting problem. One other thing, sorry, I wanted to add, Austin.
Oh yeah, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, like, I think what Daniel brought up too is interesting. Is I was thinking about that too. Is how does this translate to like self-managed and like the admin settings area? You know, is there any kind of duplication or happening maybe between those areas?
No and yes. There are features that exist in the admin area that also exist in a project, if that makes sense. But where I was thinking about this configuration page in particular would only be displaying the implications on that project. So I believe in the admin area, you can set your restrictions on SSH keys. So I would love to display like, what are those restrictions in your project, but you can't necessarily set those in your project settings, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
So I don't necessarily want to like take the setting out of the admin area. I just want the people in a project to know like, hey, here are your restrictions on SSH keys. You won't know this until you try and add one, because it won't tell you until you add it. And then it tells you, oh, you're not allowed to have this fingerprint style. You're required to have this one. Oh, well, thanks for telling me way too late.
But, got it.
Yeah, we have a number of other cases where that behavior pops up. Like I just had a feedback or working on a session right now where if somebody tries to push via HTTPS, they get an error. Or let me back up. If they have created a GitLab or account, logged in onto the GitLab account system with like a Google account, but didn't create a GitLab account password, and they try and do a push with HTTPS, it will block them from that process because they need to create an account. And so there was feedback saying like, no, I don't want my people to create accounts. We don't use that feature. And so the proposal was just put up a banner saying you need to put in a password. And that's where that rejection came back saying, no, wait, we don't want anybody to set up a password because we don't use that. And so it's like, well, wait a minute, if somebody else might, but you don't. And so having a toggle for that feature on and off at the admin level might be helpful. But again, like I said, they're not going to encounter the problem until they hit that wall, and they won't know until it's there. And then what happens? So it's another type of iteration on that problem.
Yeah, that makes sense. Daniel, did you want to talk about some feedback for solution validation?
Yeah, so we had our milestone feedback in our group, and I got some feedback and I felt really bad about it. Basically, one issue came up while I was out of office. My dev had tried to get just UX validation on the fix from my replacement while I was out of office. And they proposed a new change to that iteration, and that caused a lot of back and forth. So the dev had to undo some change and go back and start over. So that was a problem. There was a similar issue where we had proposed a change for some wording in a banner, and everyone thought it was a logical change. It went through like customer success, it went through tech writing, went through the front end dev, and it went iterated. And then the next milestone, another dev or somebody had come back and say, hey, people are getting complaints about this because it's it doesn't apply to their environment. It was like a 2FA something. It's similar to that HTTPS password where they're not supposed to set up 2FA, and we put a warning up on the banner says you need to install 2FA. And again, it felt like another outlier case where nobody thought about it between the four of us. So that created a new proposal that we haven't, I don't know if we fixed it yet or not, but a feedback session where we had to go back and make a change to the thing that we had initially thought was a totally valid change before. So I want to know, should I be changing my solution validation process? I think I should slow down, but these felt that they were very small iterative changes. I felt that they went through enough different parts of the organization to get feedback on, specifically customer success and tech writing. And so I was curious, am I doing something wrong, or is this something that I want to know what else y'all are doing that y'all avoid these kinds of problems.
I wanted to ask a question around maybe what specifically made you feel bad about getting, there were more discussions in that one merge request you mentioned that your teammate covered for you while you're out of office. And then there was another instance where you got some kickback after having gone through all the um, validation cycles, the different teams, different groups of individuals. So was it specifically that kind of made you like, oh man, that's not cool?
I guess it felt more like I either didn't follow some process or I didn't adequately do solution validation, or I felt like maybe I had done something wrong. Perhaps that's just
Mm,
my interpretation. But in order to avoid any sort of experience like that in the future, I want to make sure that I think about it and address it and try and build off of that encounter.
okay, quick follow-up. Did delay anything in your milestone?
I can't say for certain. I will assume that the back and forth and the reiteration on the prototype or the final visual caused my dev extra work because he said he'd already finished the task and was ready to send it the MR, but just
Mhm.
needed me to validate it. Which, if I was there, I'd have said, "Yeah, it looks good to me," and moved it on. It would have been fine until the second person who was doing the US validation says, "Oh, wait a minute, let's do this and reiterate and make it easier." My pushback there was like, well, arguably that should have been a different MR for the next milestone, MVC. Let's do that, take this as UX debt, and then move forward so we don't cause any problem. So it may have caused my dev to have to spend time going back and fixing stuff, which
Yeah,
possibly might have moved some things. But the point being is it felt to me like I made extra work unnecessarily for the dev.
got it. I'll share my 2 cents and then I'll let Libor take the wheel if he has any feedback too. I totally resonate with what you're saying. I really want to make it a streamlined experience once we get to the merge request, that like once we get the designs through there, I can check them out. They meet our intent. If we run into speed bumps, like we discover a technical barrier or perhaps some late game feedback comes in, that we can address those things with follow-up issues. Maybe they are things we have to compromise on and they are UX debt, or maybe they just are better ideas that we can follow up with in the future. And that's okay. It's like, okay, that something small goes through and it's not the ideal thing and we can just take it on the next milestone. Because I hate the idea of like engineers just having to continue to spin on things because we didn't refine them enough in our validation track. So I personally think there may be two opportunities here. I think the first would be you could maybe provide some coaching to whatever designer team members that you worked with in those merge requests around like how we might consider addressing things in future milestones and building to the work we agreed upon going into it. And then the other side of that could be hearing feedback from them in terms of what they think could have been addressed earlier, or maybe even what engineering thinks could have been addressed earlier before things got into the build track might be able to give you some insights for the future.
I'm just writing that down on the document.
Yeah, thanks for doing that, Daniel.
Libor, do you have anything to add?
Yeah. I was curious. Yeah, Austin, I think that's good feedback, first of all. But I was also curious, what was the feedback, that the negative feedback that came back, or who came with the feedback that made them revert to MR, or kind of backtrack,
So
or I
it
guess what caused
was,
the back and forth?
yeah. So the issue was around implementing UTC time codes in the profile. So for me, the first proposal was, well, the way that we visualize UTC is UTC -1, -10, plus whatever, just whatever the shift is. And I said, okay, well, let's just go ahead and drop that in as like a little aside next to the location. So mine would say Berlin, Germany, and then in parentheses at a 50% opacity or whatever, UTC -1. And we thought, okay, that's fine. That makes sense. And that went to the MR. And then I went on holiday. And then the UX reviewer came back and said, hey, wouldn't it be better if we put the actual time on there and not the UTC time? So instead of saying UTC -1, the proposal would be put in 5:25 p.m. Actually, back up a second. One of the things that they were saying was in the UTC, it says UTC minus 5.75 for like these time zones that have like shifts by 15 or 45 minutes. So it was a weird thing. It's like, oh, how do you do that? And then they said, why don't we just put it the time exactly? So it would say UTC or local time 5:45 p.m. Instead of the UTC minus 5.75.
Right.
And then there was another feedback round saying, well, wait a minute, not everyone does the 12-hour calendar. And so there's a whole nother discussion topic. And so all of this back and forth was like, you know, you have to wait till somebody responds if you're not in the same time zone because of our async comms. So definitely pushed the MR, which could have been just like, yeah, that's good, let's move it, to probably multiple days of waiting around, iterating and thinking and rewriting the dev code. So till it finally went forward with, now it says the time zone, or excuse me, it says a clock icon and then the local time based off of a 12-hour calendar, because that's what we use throughout the environment. So that was, from my pushback would be, well, arguably that should have just been the next iteration, right? Adding an icon, adding the local time discussion by 15 or 45 or, you know, 0.75. That's a weird discussion topic. 12-hour versus 24 is another whole discussion topic. There's actually a big issue in our backlog that's been in there. It's like, well, we have to change that across the entire organization, and it's something that we want to do, but so it's a cultural discussion. So like all these things, like cultural time zone discussion, like how people view the clock, how do you want to manifest it with an icon or just, you know, a text link or whatever, is like all that really could have been done on the next iteration. And so that was my like initial pushback in the comment thread when this was brought up after our review process. And I'm just saying, like, I want to make sure that all of that topic and discussion should have been done perhaps before the first iteration went out. Or the counter argument is, no, that's totally logical. My first iteration made sense. All the extra topic of discussion was totally also reasonable, but could have just been iterated later on down the line.
Okay, got it. Thanks for explaining that better. Yeah. Let me think about that a little bit. Yeah. So
Yeah, I think you're right, Daniel. I mean, my general disposition is if debating a area longer in a merge request is going to delay the change or implicate the development time for it. So like if developers are initially like giving it a weight of like a 2 or something or a 3, and now it becomes a 5, like then it's not really reasonable to keep that in the scope. Plenty of times I've just said, no, we'll just do a follow-on issue. Great. I love this idea. Let's take action on it next milestone. It just embodies our values. We iterate on stuff and we will continue to iterate on it. It's not like we're going to ship the time clock once and then never go back to it again. If we have a better idea, that's also a problem, then there's a justification for the future. Unless like obviously it is like significantly degrading the user experience, or if it's completely blindsided by something that maybe is offensive to like a cultural group or something. But I mean, otherwise, yeah, let's just iterate it on the future. And that maybe is a hard conversation of being able to say, we're going to sideline this and we'll address it in another milestone.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, with the spirit, of iteration. Yeah, I'm just wondering. Back to your example, Daniel. I was wondering. So it sounds like you kicked off this as an MR right away. There wasn't like an issue beforehand.
And it came as a real simple thing, as like some change about we want to show UTC. I was like, okay. I just looked at the profile page and like this, we can drop it in. Like literally, I just a 10-second fix and like design weight of 1, and just didn't think about it because it was not a big thing. But that's the reason I brought up the topic of conversation, is because I thought the same thing about the banner change with like putting in 2FA. I was like, oh yeah, if you don't have 2FA on there, put on a simple banner and say, please make sure you have 2FA enabled. And that's why I made sure I asked for a feedback session amongst the other organization to make sure that it was logical and reasonable until after it went live, and this one organization says, no, we don't want 2FA because we have some other authorization method, and totally screwing everything up. I was like, my bad. And that's kind of where the argument came. Should I slow down my process
Sure.
and not just be like, if I see a simple fix, propose a simple fix?
Yeah, I'm wondering if the problem wasn't like defined well enough, maybe in the beginning in that issue before you maybe took it on to kind of, jumping. Maybe it's possible that you jumped. I think it sounds like your process is fine. I wouldn't, but maybe questioning maybe the initial problem maybe more maybe would have, helped. Maybe the back and forth would have started sooner before it would have been the MR. So maybe
Like
asking.
Daniel said, sometimes this comes through as a merge request. Like sometimes people have
Yeah.
ideas and they just submit an MR. I've done that. I guess goes back to, was it a valuable change? If yes, it can
Yeah.
go forward and then we can build on it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There
I
is
don't
a
want you
way
to
to
feel like
always
you have to
create-
slow down, Daniel. I want you to like just feel empowered to do your best due diligence, because the worst thing to get stuck in would be like to feel like you have to get everybody's handshake to get anything done in GitLab, and that is not how we operate. Like you do your best to tie in the groups that do that like are related, and you will miss things. Like I presented on it the other week, last week on the UX showcase. I had an idea. We were literally building it, and code review was like, "Hey, you got to make some other considerations here." We kept building it, and then we changed it, and then we took the feature flag off. Like, this is how it goes. It happens. Live and learn.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah. Otherwise you'd never get anything shipped if you try to ask everyone's opinion. Right. So
Yeah, that's exactly my initial like, what did I do wrong? Because I felt automatically like I did not have the authority or the expertise to make this kind of change, and I had to go validate it with a bunch more people, which if that's part of the process, that's what I wanted to ask and make sure that I was following the process correctly. But if I have the quote unquote authority or expertise to say this seems like a logical first iteration or MVC, let's go ahead and do this, and I think I've got ample validation by the reasonable stakeholders, then we can move forward. And so that's kind of where the whole I felt bad about it feeling came from. And then that's why I brought it up in discussion today to see what else people are thinking about that.
got it. Yeah. Yeah. I think what Austin mentioned too is if the risk of shipping it is low and it's, I think it's okay to just ship and iterate. If you think it's going to make a significant risk to the product, then I think it does need more kind of feedback and, more discussion around it maybe. So.
No, I appreciate that. Thanks for the feedback, y'all.
All right, well, we're a little bit over, so should we call it?
See y'all later. Thanks.
Yeah. See y'all. Thanks.